this presentation, in a sense, I think is a bit of a time for me to stop and reflect about the work that I've done these past few years, different kinds of things. And I think they are all coming together in some mysterious way in this presentation. So please bear with me because it's going to be a bit, hopefully not too disjointed. But I think for me this is a bit of a time when I am moving to something that for my personal reflection is relatively new, so not everything is very clear still. So the title itself is a bit weird. Some of you might have recognized it as a Theology of the Bodiless. I don't know whether that rings a bell. There is a quote actually from Eric McLuhan. Eric was commenting on the theology of the body of John Paul II, and he made this remark when he said, well, maybe we should have something accompanying this text, which is a theology of the bodiless. So that is a quote actually from Eric. Catholic sacramental formation, as you also probably know, is something that for Eric McLuhan was very important. In the age of AI is because that is, I think, what we are living. We are beginning to live an age of artificial intelligence that is really the ground through which we are functioning. And this, of course, is my favorite word ever, because that is what I always do. I always try to map. Okay, so kind of these are the first words, so these are the words that then need to be developed. That is kind of always my way of thinking through things. So really and truly what I'm hoping to do, this presentation that doesn't have a very clear order, but I am really going to try to unpack that title. And then I try to move to what I think can be bits and pieces to try to do that famous Prolegomenon bit. So the bits and pieces, I want to start with sacramental, what that means. Then I want to just say a little bit about bodiless, what that means. AI as ground, what that might mean. And really and truly what I'm trying to do, what I think I've always tried to do, is theological anthropology for our particular context. I think that is what I'm really trying to do. So I arrived at that conclusion an hour ago. Okay. I also want to say something important, and this is in relation, to me it is very important, in relation to what we are trying to do as a whole in this gathering, which is this whole question of formation. I think something that I've come to realize more these past few years is that formation is always, first and foremost, a healing, a regeneration, and then an augmentation, if you will, an augmentation in the sense of a flourishing. But I think the aspect of healing, we really need to consider it and consider it seriously, because at the end of the day, this is what evangelization is about. This is what salvation is about. Salvation doesn't start from, we're fine, we're getting better. It starts from, we're broken, we need healing, and then we are divinized. And I think that theological map of broken, healing, but then because we are healed, because we are saved, we are being asked to do something more, and we are being asked to become and to be something greater, this whole sense of flourishing, of being divinized. I think that needs to be kept in mind. But there is always this sense that forming is also a healing. Open bracket, close bracket, this is also how Aquinas himself understands the whole role of the teacher. The teacher is like a doctor, first and foremost. You diagnose how the student is not healthy, and you try to apply the medicine that will help make him better, and then so he can grow or she can grow more naturally. So I'll start with this whole idea of sacramental imagination, and to me it boils down, I mean here this doesn't need much introduction, but to me it always boils down to this one word, that in the classical trivium in Marshall McLuhan's own doctoral dissertation, there is so much about this. To me, which I then try to also give it a bit of a more theological spin, it is this whole idea of logos as being inherently not just the speech, but intelligibility. So really and truly, it is this whole sense that only the human, so this is why it's theological anthropology, endowed with reason, reason being the clearest mark of our being, imago Dei, speaks like God. So human words do essentially these number of things. Words capture what things or experiences essentially are in God's wisdom. This emphasis on God's wisdom to me is important theologically, and you'll see how. Of course, that implies our being human or being imago Dei. that is really clear in Genesis 2:20, right? When God brings all the beasts of the earth to Adam, and Adam has to name them. This naming business is key. And of course, because I'm a moral theologian, I have to put this bit here, right? This extends to our action, because our action, in a sense, is like words that now we speak. Actions, what we do, are like words that we speak. So natural law, which is, of course, recta ratio, right reason, is about the human participating also in the eternal law to steward God's creation. And that, of course, is classic Thomas Aquinas. I just want to add this bit here, however, that sacramental is not just the sense of analogy of being, it is also something more. And Eric McLuhan has much more to say about this, so I'll just touch upon it. Oops, I'm doing two screens, so. We also need to keep in mind that yes, the universe in and of itself reveals God's creative power, but the church has a particular role. And in particular, this comes through in the seven sacraments, in the sacraments. So the sacraments are in themselves specific modes of God's self-communication that divinize through human service, this whole sense of the liturgy, right? So we are also in the sacraments collaborating with God, and God actualizes. So this, I think, is important. Eric McLuhan really stresses this, the immediacy of the action, the transformation that is immediate. And this is different from the other modes of sacramentality, if you will, because this is about a clearer revelation. It is about a true embodiment of the saving action of Christ and of the joy of the Spirit. Okay? So this, I think, is key because it makes, of course, the church as the quintessential sacrament, and church needs to be understood as the personal transformation, salvation, divinization of the Christian. I like to use, I love this phrase, Karl Rahner's, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will be none at all. And of course, the Christian of the future is not of the future. The Christian of today needs to be a mystic or none at all. But this whole sense of mysticism is not like La La Land mysticism. It is this whole sense of truly embodying what it means to be a Christian, to be a witness. I think Pope Francis is constantly emphasizing this. So, why is this important? Because I think that the whole point of being a true Christian is that this sense of being a mystic also acts as an antidote. This whole sense of being an antidote, I think it is very important and comes across in Eric McLuhan's work on cynic satire. I'm not going to get into that. But the whole point of being an antidote to sin is important. So please we have to keep in mind that what sin does, sin is a breakdown of God's order of creation. So what we really need to do is to heal that breakdown. So God heals that breakdown, but that healing happens through our collaboration with God's saving grace, right? And this is the turning point for me. What I think really manifests this lie, this breakdown as a lie, is in our times, is this whole sense of bodilessness. Okay? So to me, this whole sense of bodilessness, I'm using it as a sense of a primordial wound. But of course, this is theology. This is the fun of being a theologian, because at every point you have a twist. Because as Paul says, whenever I am weak, then I am strong. And this is how this is how Christ works. At the moment of weakness, at the deepest wound, that is where there is also the strongest strength, right? So our bodilessness, I think, is also the mark, is also the fountain, if you will, for our strength, for the strength that is emerging. That is, I think, what that is where we need to pay attention. That is where we need to discern. That is where the Holy Spirit would be working, at our deepest wound. That is my argument. So, I wanted to present with you this quote from Eric that really kind of inspired a bit this whole presentation. So, in the Synesthesia, etc., book, for those who might be interested, I will just let you know later, I don't remember the title. Eric says this: the physical body of the discarnate user is still there. So we speak about disembodiment. In my dissertation, I do a lot of work on disembodiment. Well, it's still there, however, the body. I mean, I'm here, tucked away somewhere in one of the locations. But it is irrelevant to the new condition of multilocationalism. But the point is this. The point is that man is now split. He lives two lives, one in the body, one out of the body. The natural integrity of the body has been set aside, and the bodily sensus communis is in disarray, disintegrated. So that shows you it's a mark of sin, disintegrated in disarray. But, or is it more accurate to say that the dissociated sensibility given us by the phonetic alphabet has been yanked back together by our electric technologies? I think it's yes. So the point is this. What literacy does is separate, split. Literacy splits the mind from the body. What electricity does and what the digital context does, I think it is bring it back together in some bizarre manner. So let's see. This is my whatever. So I want to argue for a re-embodiment that perhaps is an extended embodiment. So I want to make kind of these claims. First of all, theologically speaking, the proper separation of the soul from the body happens once and once alone. Well, okay? That is when the human created as embodied soul splits at the moment of death. At the moment of death, the body disintegrates, will disintegrate, biological reality. Our soul continues to exist. I'm not saying anything extraordinary, everybody knows this. So, what we mean then by bodilessness really and truly is what McLuhan describes as numbness, narcosis, the whole Narcissus thing that is our predicament. It is essentially not taking responsibility for our newfound abilities. It is, I think, essentially what Romano Guardini talks about. We are not taking responsibility for our power. It is essentially, I have this, and I don't truly appreciate that this is me. This was rule number one of what Marshall McLuhan tried to preach. This is me. The iPad is me. The iPhone is me. Okay? They are all me. So, now, my whole point is this, that in an age of artificial intelligence, I think we are at a crossroad for this reason. I'm just going to be very brief about this, but I think you will see the gist. I think what artificial intelligence does is, first and foremost, it is not simply memory, it is not simply all those things. It is now an intelligence that acts. That is the whole point of artificial intelligence. It is also a kind of intelligence that learns itself, in itself, okay? My whole point is that nature that before we saw it as matter, now we truly can no longer see it as that. So what we are existing in now is truly this whole sense of everything that surrounds us is now full of meaning. Again, we cannot hide that. Okay? The very fact that we can have sensors in everything, the very fact that we can measure anything, the very fact that everything that is measured is measured, can be computed, can whatever. That means that everything that we have created as extension of ourselves, but that we have separated from ourselves, is meaningful. So this, in a sense, recovers this whole sense of enchantment, of existing in a world that is meaningful. So, my point is this. If we take the whole sense of my iPad is me, it's an extension of me, then I think my dismembered body, how the iPad is really an extension of me, quite literally, okay? I'm not being very metaphorical here. I'm being quite literal, but not too literal, okay? No, you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to say. But this really makes it difficult for me to have a sense of where I begin and where I end. Throughout these past 2 days, I've been constantly communicating with people from all over. That's, of course, what all of us do. Where do I begin? Where do I end? Where does my body begin? Where does my body end? Okay? So my whole point is that our theological anthropology must consider this state of re-embodiedness, but it is a re-embodiedness, I think. So we must appropriate fully our bodily functions. By bodily, I don't mean this. You understand what I mean. I think Elon Musk, I haven't followed Elon Musk this past year, but usually I try to follow Elon Musk a lot. I think Elon Musk is really onto something with this, which is the problem of interfacing. If we are not going to be able to interface with AI in a way that is quick and rapid, I mean, at this point I interface with the screen using my finger, that is not good enough. If we are not going to be able to interface, then I think it is a problem. So, interfacing, I think it's key. I need to be able to feel to the extent of my arm. My arm cannot remain, okay, you get my gist? So that to me also means, this is something I developed in another paper a while ago, that because my body extends beyond me, and I'm going to be clear about this, this is not just because I am the whole planet, that is not what I'm trying to say. Because all of us also experience this differently, so I will get to that. But the whole point is that I can reach beyond this limited body. Okay? So my sense of prudence cannot be limited to my actions that are immediate. This is obvious when you stop and think about it. With the whole ecological crisis, right? When I kind of get a bit concerned because I'm using too much plastic, I am doing that precisely because I'm trying to be ecologically prudent. And now, please don't take that too literally. Okay? Not simply because I care about the trees and whatnot, but also because I understand the effects of my little action in the here and now that they have on the whole planet. I am aware of that. I know that. And if I know that, I need to be ecologically prudent. This is the equivalent of the parent in a family, of course this was the father of the family, had to be prudent for the household. The politician is prudent for the polis. Today, if I can reach the whole planet, I need to be prudent for the whole planet. All of us. Personally. Yeah. Now, there is another twist to this. And this is, to me, this is a very important quote from Walter Ronk. It is this whole sense that technology is always natural to us. So technology is what always is going to augment something that is present already within our nature, but can only flourish through our interaction with the technology. So, the beauty of becoming a violinist implies the existence of the violin. But the violinist is a special person compared to me, who is clueless about music, right? Now, this new embodiedness, whatever it is, this new state of being human, let's call it that, I think it is going to imply something analogous to what happens in the big shift between orality and literacy. In orality, you have this huge emphasis on memory, because that is how you exist. Without memory, you are not going to survive as a species. But with the rise of literacy, memory is extended outside of your body. That too. So you need to take responsibility, not just of your personal memory, but of the memory outside of your body. It matters which text you are going to copy and pass on to the next generation. It mattered big time, right? So my whole point is this. Because of that move, the possibilities of abstract thinking could arise, and in a better way. For anybody who's familiar with the work of Eric Havelock, and Eric Havelock to me is up there on the Pantheon, you understand what I mean, okay? His book about the sense of justice, from Homer to I think he goes to Plato, Aristotle, and the rest of it, to me it's brilliant. So the sense of justice, and then the sense of justice, how it is articulated now. Because the technology allows a new cognitive ability, if you will, to develop. So my whole question is this. In this new environment, with this kind of new embodiedness, with this kind of new sense of what it means to be human, what is it that can grow and develop? So my claim is this. My claim is that we are kind of moving to a new sense of communal embodiment. Let me try to unpack that, because I'm not saying we become the Borg. For those of you who are my age and older, you understand that. You know what the Borg is? The Borg, Star Trek Borg, okay? I am saying we should not become Star Trek Borg, but we are becoming Star Trek Borg. At this point, we are becoming Star Trek Borg. So we should not become Star Trek Borg. I think what we really need is a sense of ecological conversion that also implies a conversion to being persons in relationship who collaborate in their diversity to steward creation. My experience, with all its reach, needs to work closely with your experience, with all its reach, but it doesn't mean that we all annihilate our sense of self either. Persons in relationship, okay? So, because I love applying the laws of media, thank you for doing it before, I don't have to do it now, okay? Power is always first and foremost, so the new is always in retrieval. My hunch, so this is a hunch, my hunch is that what will be retrieved, where we are being challenged to grow as in our communal embodiment as community of persons, is in our sense of soulfulness. Now, let me unpack what that soulfulness means. So the image that I have in my mind is of a forest, okay? Lately, I'm not sure on which magazine it was, they are really discovering that trees and plants actually communicate through their roots, okay? The image that I want to share with you is that I think we are like trees. Throughout the age of literacy, we have really spread, our branches, grown a lot of leaves, and progressively, we have not taken care of our roots. I tend to do this with my plants because I'm not a very good gardener. So what tends to happen is, for a while they look very pretty, they can grow, but you continue not nurturing the soul and not taking care of the roots, it will still look pretty for a while, but then it will start dying. The point I'm trying to make is that we have developed a lot, the up bit, the foliage and stuff. We need to develop more the roots. And I'm going to explain a bit more what I mean by that. And I'm actually going to read a text now, if you bear with me. I'm using this longish quote from an Orthodox theologian, Jean-Claude Larcher, on the theology of the body, not to be confused with John Paul II at all. He basically does something he's a very quick few paragraphs where he presents theological anthropology in the tradition, but arguably also closer to the Orthodox tradition, but not just, as you will see. So this is, remember, his whole point is the theology of the body, so that is how he's starting. It is also striking that in the same version from Genesis, man is already recognizably, oh, by the way, he is actually unpacking. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. That is what he is working with. So first he starts with this whole idea that the body is already human. It's already human because, it is already recognizably present in the body because he calls it formed man. He doesn't call it formed matter, he calls it formed man. But there is still not this full sense of humanness before there is the breath of life. So the whole argument is going to be on what is that breath of life. And his whole point is this. So according to Christian anthropology, this breath of life, the anima, the soul, the anima, the soul, is actually two things and not one. Read Adversus Heresis, and Irenaeus says the same thing. So, the body, everybody knows what that is, physically speaking, well, but then there is the soul, but that really is not just the soul. It is really the proper soul, suke, but also the spirit, nous. I think you're starting to see where I'm going with this. We have tended to emphasize a lot of this in our tradition, including Catholic Christian tradition. Although, for instance, yesterday, the work that you presented to us, we really were emphasizing, I think, much of this. So it's not like, or the work that Father Paul presented, it's not like this does not exist. But we have really emphasized this as theology. We have really emphasized this now, even in terms of culture. So my whole point is that I think we need to emphasize more of this. So he is going to say then that this soul proper also comprises 3 parts, and you are familiar with those 3 parts. By the way, I'm actually not using the language of interior and exterior senses, and for a reason. When I stop to think about it, I suspect that interior and exterior senses is precisely what a literate person would use. That's what I suspect. So I think I'm just going with this simple schema. So the 3 kinds of soul are, of course, the vegetative. The vegetative soul is what originally gives us a sense of life. So this is what allows us to, to do our bodily functions fine. So it is the function of the regulation of nutrition, growth, and generation. So to me, it's like interfaces, but it's soul. But it interfaces between the body and the first aspect of ourselves that is not body, but soul, but something else other than body. Okay? Then there is another level, and this other level is what is called the animal power, common to humans and animals, and this includes moral theologians. The insensitive power, it's what controls aggressiveness. The appetitive power, of course, the source of emotions, desires, affectivity. In Freud, you will have your thanatos and your eros, right? But then, and this is the bit that I admit blew my mind, the imagination in its elementary form. And he calls that the reproductive imagination. And then he does a footnote. And the footnote says, to be distinguished from the creative imagination which can form new images. So he's actually saying that there is a reproductive imagination here. I put all this under drama because I think it fits. So there is something here that is, now this is let me do this. I cheated here, okay? I did this as part of my paper. I did not have the patience to do it on Keynote. I took a picture of it. Okay? So my whole argument is this. For those of you who are familiar with Bulgakov, you will understand I'm being somewhat sociological. Don't call me heretical, please. But the whole point is this. Body, nature. For now, ignore this. Soul, sensation and perception, life rising to awareness. So this is my commentary. The drives, life rising to desire. Received images, because they represent. I'm using here James Hillman, archetypal psychologist, post-Jungian. He calls it the soul's code. And I'm going to relate it then so please bear with me, because I'm putting a lot of things in this one image. The point is this. Life is rising to communicating. And the other point is this. An incarnate memory, and this is a quote that you will see at the end of my presentation, but this is a memory, by incarnate memory. It is a memory that emerges from below. That's my point. So this is received. But then, on the level of spirit, of nous, of proper intelligence as we usually understand it, there is the opposite. Here we receive images, here we construct them. Right? So this is what is received, in a sense, like the forms in Plato. The Orthodox tend to be more Platonic, but not just. I think it's a better mix, in my humble opinion. But then also what we create. So the higher memory, creative images, logos, self-determination, proper communication, and of course, at the topmost level, we are open to God. We are open to God. So the point is this, in Bulgakov, for the record, the whole sense is that God's nature, divine Sophia, extends herself in creation. But creation, for the record, is not just us or the world. Creation is also the angelic realm, heaven. Creation is of heaven and earth. I'm going to go to that if there is time later. But the point is this attentiveness that is emerging from nature is in itself also of God. Right? And Bulgakov, in his book on angels, he actually argues that angels created as persons, desiring for us, mind you, for us, heaven and earth, he argues in this way. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've been doing theology for the longest time. This is the very first book I read on angels. But I found it mind-blowing. And the whole point is that angels are created for us, but for us, for the world. So they assist on these multiple levels of accompaniment, but also of action. So the images that we receive, if you will, on this level from the flesh, they are also in themselves imbued with God. But this is the equivalent, if you will, of the presence of God as, of creation as sacramental versus the acts of the sacraments that would be now up there, right? Does that remotely make sense? Maybe not, but okay. So, all I'm saying, I think really and truly is something of the sort. The soul is intermediary between the body and mind. It gets disconnected through sin. I think what really, I think this really comes across in our literature of the spiritual tradition. I think the soul is important because the spirit needs soul and the body through soul. And this is why you have things like the dark night of the soul, a sense of dissent. James Hillman, archetypal psychologist, not particularly Christian, probably nothing at all, he talks about how depression, for instance, is necessary for that reason. You go down because you need to go down in order to be able to go truly up. Because see, this is spirit with a small s. Until you really go down and hit rock bottom and really get a feel of your sense of sin, of your sense of brokenness, and not just yours probably, but all of us connected, the sense of sinfulness in the world, you really cannot do this whole ascent to spirit up there. And I think what really to me strikes me is that this whole process always needs another. You cannot do it on your own. And that's why spiritual accompaniment is always with another. So, my gist in all this is that we have much literature in the tradition about this, doing it personally. But I think because of our new sense of embodiment as being constantly connected to each other and the rest, I have 5 minutes, then maybe I'll manage. Because we are constantly connected to each other, I think what really we need is a development of this whole sense of communal soul. I'm not sure yet what that means, but I can tell you one thing. These past few weeks when I've been working on this paper, this whole sense of a communal soul, Pope Francis repeated it a number of times. So there is something going on here. So, these are just ideas that I'm throwing out there because they are still not particularly organized, but this is what came to mind as I was thinking through this problematic. This came to mind. Okay? So, how are we recovering and strength? How can we then, as healing and formation, recover and strengthen a sense of communal soul? So this is both a human formation and a Christian formation. The two are not exactly distinguished, as you very well know. So the first one. Now I admit that this is one of my favorite things. I think we really need, and Balthasar does this, right? A proper soteriological foundation that really considers the theology of Holy Saturday. What happens in Holy Saturday? In Holy Saturday there is the descent into hell, there is the opening of Hades, and there are the souls, Adam, Eve, so there are the souls. I think this needs some more theological reflection on what it means to be soul, theologically speaking. Soul disconnected from body. I think something like this would help. I'm not sure how, but I think it would. The second aspect, I think in the tradition, we have lots of stories, narratives, and this is where I really kind of loved a lot of the work that is being done, on traditions of the soul's descent and ascent, received images of souls. This, of course, is l'Inferno. And I'm like, I always loved l'Inferno in particular. And I'm like, this is so vivid. Don't tell me that he simply imagined this, that it is simply a construction. When Jung and archetypus and Jung, collective, this whole idea of collective unconscious, starting with Freud, collective and then collective unconscious in Jung, and this whole idea of archetypal psychology, it talks about a collective soul, somehow. Collective memories, almost in our flesh, that are passed on. These past 2 years, I worked with a student on the whole idea of a cultural trauma, of memories that are passed on from one generation to another. Something is there, okay, in the past that needs to be repeated. Okay. The third one, by the way, this one, I think it doesn't need to be, or rather, it should not be just Christian. The third one, I think we need more of this. This is Bulgakov. I mean, I learned more about it through Bulgakov, but I think we need more of a sense of creative spirits. Originally, this is what I wanted to do with the whole notion of AI, but so far I've bracketed it. But I think we need more of this. What it means to be a good, creative spirit. This really struck me. The point of this is because Bulgakov is basically saying all of us as human beings sense these, like we have a history of knowing these presences. And he makes something really interesting. Yesterday, I think it was Reed who said we return to polytheism. I don't think that's such a bad thing. The problem with polytheism, as Bulgakov is describing it, polytheism did know spiritual hierarchies, but it never knew how to distinguish and contrast the creator and the creation. It could not, because to distinguish the creator from the creation, it required an act of abstraction that the pre-literate was not able to do, literally. So I think there is a reason why monotheism arises at a particular point in human history. But it doesn't mean, this is the point, right? Pre-literacy, literacy, you're retrieving something. What we really are retrieving is from the pre-literate. And I think we are retrieving also something of this sort. But it's going to be in a new shape. The whole point is that he's saying, this is meaningful. Now, he's not the only one saying this is meaningful. Pope Francis says this all the time. 2 more slides and I'm done. Yeah. So, just a few weeks ago, he used the soul of the people, but it's not the first time he used this, when he addressed Romanian authorities on his trip. Basically, he's saying, for your Catholic social teaching, it is not just the material conditions that you need to take care of. It is not something that you're going to exercise with your head. You need to exercise it by taking care of the very soul of your people. And he continues, because peoples have a soul, as Bulgakov is saying before. Bulgakov is actually saying we each have our individual angel, but then peoples have angels, like your totem. So, because peoples have a soul, they have their own way of perceiving and experiencing reality. To keep going back to its very soul, this is what makes a people progress. Then, in the Instrumentum Laboris of the Pan-Amazon Synod, there are enough Italians here, I'm not going to translate. He talks about l'anima del popolo cattolico dell'Amazzonia, okay? This soul of the people of the Amazon has been shaped, so pagans, let's be blunt, has been also shaped by Catholic consciousness. It has been shaped for the good by a Catholic consciousness. It has also been wounded by a Catholic consciousness. But the point is, souls are not static. They definitely change, evolve, and can interrelate. The Western, Spanish, Catholic, whatever, related with all the peoples of the Amazon. And now the peoples of the Amazon need to teach us something. For all those criticizing the instrumentum laboris of the Pan-Amazon Synod. And now this is personal. This is personal. This is Father Giovanni Cefai, MSSP. MSSP is a Maltese religious order, the Missionary Society of St. Paul. Father Giovanni Cefai, a few days ago, was ordained as the first bishop of the territorial prelature of Santiago Apostol de Arequipa in Peru. This is a huge land in the middle of nowhere. The people who will be his flock, and you see some of them, are peoples, different peoples. And I could share in this experience because a good friend of mine was there for the ordination, and of course he was sending me pictures. We saw the whole thing online. This is it. This sharing is already happening in something as simple as that. So I think it is something to build upon. The last bit, to finish with the sacraments. This is a quote from Lumen Fidei. So this is the Pope Benedict, Pope Francis bit. And it reminds that the sacraments ultimately, the highest spiritual communicates an incarnate memory, linked to the times and places of our lives, linked to all our senses, and then the whole person is engaged as a vedara. The awakening of faith is linked to the dawning of a new sacramental sense in our lives as human beings and as Christians, in which visible and material realities are seen to point themselves to the mystery of the eternal. I think that is really the trajectory of formation. That's it. I apologize for taking too long.